The king of racing games is finally back to their numbered series after a decade of waiting. But will GT7 live up to the expectations following the last installment, Sport? Find out in Gran Turismo 7, the story so far. Before we start with the video, however, I must mention that I did not play Sport during its lifetime. I did try out the game briefly though, thanks to Amiso generously gifting the game to me just prior to 7's release. I also skipped the PlayStation 3 titles as I never got the console. But, my lack of experience from the last few titles aside, I shall review GT7 by comparing it to the older titles, to see what's changed and what's remained familiar. I suppose we should start off with the most obvious question. How much content does the game have? Well, let's take a look at the amount of cars first. So at launch, GT7 features 424 cars. Definitely a decent amount, and considering more cars will be added later, I'm positive we can expect a total similar to GT2's vast list of cars. GT2 had 650 cars, nearly 5 times as much as we had in the original Gran Turismo. GT3, on the other hand, didn't fare much better in the car department either, but I always thought of GT3 as a glorified tech demo, much like the working title GT2000. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Anyway, moving on to the PS3 titles, they feature by far the biggest car selections in the series, both games at over 1000. However, there is a small catch. Like the majority of the GT fans are painfully aware of, for the PS3 titles, Polyphony decided to split the car selection in two, diecasts and real cars. What this means is that only 1/4 of the cars have been fully modeled with an interior. Now, I understand that modeling cars to the best possible quality takes time, but considering there was a long gap between the releases of GT4 and 5, one would think that they would have had plenty of time. But nevertheless, we're finally free of that curse as of Sport. Now, GT7 has set the new standard for the series, as they shifted focus from quantity to quality instead. And what about Sport? It was clearly intended to be an esports spin-off. When I first heard about the game, I knew it wasn't GT7 from the get-go. All the previous main games had the chronological number in the title, so Sport was indeed something different. At launch, it didn't even feature a single-player career mode of any kind, and was added later via an update. Speaking of single-player career, let's see how GT7 did it. When you fire up GT7, as you might expect, you will be treated to the opening movie to set the mood. Oh, excuse me? I thought we were gonna watch movies? Are we, having technical difficulties? No? Alright, carry on. After you've gone through the settings, you're immediately put into the driver's seat in the form of Music Rally. Personally, this was a really strange way to begin my playthrough experience. In order to get to the next phase, which is naturally the opening movie, you must first clear the music rally of your choosing. As the music concert is over, we get into the GT mood as we watch the opening movie. Once the opening movie has concluded, we finally get to see the gorgeous New World map, 3D modeled and in all its next generation glory. Ah! A human! Stay away from me! I'm antisocial! So, yeah. Another unexpected plot twist. NPCs. Okay, I guess I can try socializing a little bit. In all seriousness though, the addition of dialogue with NPCs is a welcome addition, as no GT title to date has featured character interaction in any shape or form. However, the dialogue quickly gets tiring, and I find it a bit off-putting since reading text and pressing a button to see the next set of words makes me feel like I'm playing a visual novel. The least they could have done is have voice actors give life to these lifeless characters, but I suppose Polyphony didn't have the money to actually hire people that grant the characters the ability to speak. Thankfully, if this isn't your thing, you have the option to speed up the process a bit. I can't even imagine what I would have had to deal with had I chosen no on this screen. Moving on to the gameplay side of things, after a quick dialogue babble, we get to take a look at the used cars dealership. Now, because I pre-ordered the game, I was given an additional 100,000 credits, but since I wanted to stick to traditions, I only looked at the top 3 cars, each at under 20,000. Modern compacts each. Boring. I would have much rather have a— Oh my god, is that a yellow E? So, now that we got our first car, how about we start her up and go wheel to wheel with others? Hang on, a cafe? Does this mean we'll be socializing with people even more? At first, I thought the cafe was optional, but as it turns out, the cafe is, in fact, the game's career mode. That might take a while to sink in, I know. But the rules are simple. You're given a menu book with a certain task. Most of the time it's to collect 3 cars featured in the book. Once you've completed the task, you return to the cafe for the next menu. As you go, you unlock more tracks and races. What are these tasks, you ask? Isn't GT purely about winning races? Not quite. At least not all the time. You see, sometimes you get these random menu books with extremely easy tasks, like tuning a car, wanging your car, washing a car, or getting a license. Oh yeah, those are a thing. Finally, after all this time, we get something that we're familiar with. Good old licenses, the start to any GT experience. There are 5 licenses with 10 tests each. This is actually a relief. I would never want to go through GT4 and its mighty 80 license tests. No guide labs anymore either, just you and the clock. So I went ahead and golded each license on my first session to get a feel for the difficulty. And how was it? It was a slight disappointment. It only took me a couple hours to gold everything, using a DualShock of course for the authentic feel. This was also necessary, as with a wheel I could just breeze through the licenses. In Sport, I completed the driving school with the wheel, and it was way too easy, so I made sure to switch to the more primitive and simple input device for GT7. Now, with the licenses completed, we can fully focus on our career. Sorry. Our cafe quest? As I mentioned before, you unlock new tracks and races as you go, but you also unlock new world map locations along the way. Initially, you cannot even tune your car. I can understand the new car dealership being introduced later though, as most cars require quite a bit more of that dough anyway. And that is single player career in a nutshell. Grab menu, do what Uncle Lucas says, earn reward, next menu. And what's the number of the last menu? Well, in case you don't want to get spoiled, cover your ears and look away from the screen now for a moment. 39. Literally an odd number, but oh well. And that wraps up the single player segment of this review. How was the game for me? Personally, I didn't find the cafe concept appealing. While it was new and exciting, as well as beginner friendly, the game began to feel very repetitive. At the very least though, you're forced to drive a lot of different cars, making for variety, but personally, this is the one part I wouldn't have minded if it was repetitive, meaning driving your favorite cars more often. But as a whole, you felt like a hamster on a wheel. What made things worse is that you didn't even get treated to proper championships, as most consisted of a handful of races, the first half following the same pattern. Track normal, track reversed. Gah. Even the last Minibook's championship consisted of just 5 races, which might be a callback to the PS1 titles, but I was expecting a bit more. Also, at the time of this video, currently at patch 1.13, there is no way to replay the cafe mode. You're basically stuck to endgame. But this is due to the fact that the game requires an internet connection, which in turn means that your save file is also tied to your PSN account. In other words, if you want to restart the playthrough, you need another PSN account. This brings us to the next segment, which is very brief, but is quite an important one. So yes, GT7 requires an internet connection to play. If you're not connected to the PlayStation network, you may only play Music Rally or Arcade mode through the World Circuit's blip on the world map. Polyphony have stated that the reason for the game running online is to prevent cheating. While I completely understand this, as people would find a way to hack the game and edit the save files, it's still frustrating all the same. Especially if you're using a Wi-Fi and it has a tendency to have hiccups, you could run into trouble. While playing away from home, the Wi-Fi I was using had one of those hiccups and cost me the credits I was literally about to be paid. Right on that screen. Oh. I unfortunately don't see this changing anytime soon. We just have to deal with it. Also, I will briefly touch on this subject at the end of the video, but for now, let's move on to the next segment, which is the track selection. We now know how much choice one has for wheels, but what about a place to ride them? Well, the good news is there are a lot of choices. Real-world tracks, plenty of well-designed fictional tracks, including a few classic ones. The bad news is, these classic ones from the oldest GTs are from the original GT only. Even worse, we only got 3 tracks. Further bad news is, one of them, the Forest, has been reprofiled. I'm definitely not the only one from the community who didn't like the changes they made. So instead of me discussing the changes they made in detail, here's a comparison. Wow, they really dislike the original design, don't they? Nostalgia vibes aside, the only reason they reprofiled the track is to make it more competitive. Truthfully, every time I raced on this track in GT4 Online, I realized just how poor the racing there was. As cool of a track as it is, the only real overtaking opportunity would be into turn 1. Otherwise, you would just have to hope for someone to make a mistake. Either way, them redesigning a nostalgic track to this extent is quite a blow below the belt. We can only hope they will eventually come to their senses and release a classic version with the old layout. Oh, but we still have 2 more classics. Trial Mountain and High Speed Ring. While I honestly don't care much about the latter, it's still very cool to see and it's just like the GT4 version. This is how you make a remastered track. Same goes for Trial Mountain. While there is one reprofiled part, the track is just like the original, albeit with some changes to proportions. As for the changed part, it is the high-risk, high-reward chicane at the end of the lap. Only now it's a real chicane, which definitely slows you down. But unlike Deep Forest, I don't mind this change too much. At least it's still technically one corner, as it's quickly dealt with in the original anyway. But that's it for the classic tracks. All the rest are returning tracks from Sport along with the real-life tracks. All of us are desperately waiting for the juiciest of tracks. While I was expecting for more, I'm genuinely surprised they didn't include Grand Valley. That, to me, is the most notable track in the GT franchise. Trial Mountain and Deep Forest are cool, but I cannot wait to do an endurance on this demanding track. Oh, right. About the endurances, at launch, we have none. 0. This was another big shock for everyone, especially with the dynamic weather they've developed. You would think that they would take advantage of it and showcase it in some of the endurances, but as it turns out, there are none. Fortunately, as of version 1.11, we got a taste of what's to come. 8 one-hour-long endurances were added into missions. Thankfully, they immediately did one better than GT6 and brought back actual endurances, and not the sprints that the game had. And with more updates coming in the future, we can expect even more. Next up, I will quickly summarize the miscellaneous stuff before concluding the video with the evolution of GT7. So, now that we've covered the cafe and the contents, it's time to look at what else the world map has to offer. Of course, we have the essentials, such as the dealerships, tuning and maintenance shops, and the license center. Then naturally, we need to take the real action somewhere. We have world circuits, the place where all tracks are found, as well as missions and the online racing hubs. As for the side things, we have photo mode, scapes, the returning feature from Sport, as well as Showcase. Showcase, in a nutshell, is the media center. This is where you can find photos taken in scapes, as well as car/driving gear colors. If you lack creativity, spare time, or perhaps what it takes to make a stunning livery, this is the place to browse what people have conceived. You can also find custom decals and stickers, including real-life sponsors, that are not included in the game's default set of decals, also provided by the community. Aside from the online gallery, Showcase is also where you will find your own creations and race replays. The game's music is also found here. So that about sums it up for the world map. The design of the map is quite frankly satisfying, especially with the modeled background. What I find irksome, however, is the fact that the cafe is located at the center instead of your garage, like the old games. Especially with the cafe done and dealt with, it just adds insult to injury. But other than this nitpick, everything is as it should be, and it's far more organized than the mess of a map GT4 had. Alright, so let's quickly take a look at car customization. When waiting for GT7, this was the feature that got me hyped the most. I cannot emphasize enough how satisfying it is when you can tune your car to be exactly as how you want it. And now that we have the ability to create and share liveries, just like in sport, the amount of creativity is nigh limitless. I didn't even talk about the most visible thing, which is obviously the graphics, but I doubt it needs to be discussed. It's typical Gran Turismo quality, photorealistic graphics. This has been the department in which they excel the most ever since GT3. For a game from 2001, the game looked stunning for its time, and the games have never visually disappointed since. And when it comes to the physics, they are also up there. While Gran Turismo is not a simulation like Assetto Corsa or iRacing, it's still nonetheless quite the experience. There was initially something wrong with how rear-wheel drive cars handled, however, but it has been tweaked as of the last update, and I think they succeeded. Basically, the cars were way too rear-happy and snappy, but now they are a lot more predictable and drive like they should, so we're good on the physics department as well. Be it as simcade as it may, it should still not be taken lightly. You're in for a hell of a ride. I think that's it for the most important parts. There are still some things here and there, but I don't wish to drag on the video too long, but I hope you established some kind of an idea. Now then, it's time to close this video with a summary on each patch we've gotten so far. I won't go through all the patch notes as unfortunately there are quite a few. The game has had its fair share of bug and issue fixes as well as gameplay tweaks. But without further ado, we will start by looking at 106. Why 106 and not 101? Because 106 are the oldest patch notes we can still read. All the patch notes are listed on Gran Turismo's website as opposed to the update history found in the game's launch icons. As for patch 106, there isn't too much to discuss here. Bug fixes, improvements, added features, you name it. The usual things you would expect in a patch. One note stands out, however. It says, fixed a very rare issue wherein progress made in menu book would not be recognized and prevented players from continuing their playthrough. This was honestly pretty hilarious and unfortunate to read. It's already bad enough the game is online only, but when you can't even progress due to a bug, it's just frustrating. Personally, I didn't run into any problems during my playthrough aside from smaller things, but the game is still full of all kinds of quirks, so we can expect a lot more patches to come. Next up, we take a look at 1.07/1.08. The reason these two patches come in a set is because as soon as Polyphony released 1.07, they found out it had a critical bug which they then had to fix. In over 24 hours? While this may sound like I'm exaggerating things and might not sound like a big deal, I must remind you that the game is online. So, with the game down for maintenance as they worked on 1.08, no one could play the game. Yes, fun. So, you think that made GT7 look bad? Well, the worst is yet to come. During the whole time the game was down, we received no updates whatsoever. We were kept in the dark for over a day, everyone wondering what's going on. Such amazing communication. Lack thereof, that is. We did get an informative letter from Kazunori Yamauchi, the creator of GT, though. He explained as to what went wrong with 1.07. Keep this letter in mind, I will come back to it soon. Anyway, let's take a look at what this patch combo brought to the table. Among the first few lines of 1.08, we find a sentence that triggers deja vu. Fixed an issue where in some cases the game would not progress to the world map, making it impossible to play. Yeah. Even up to this day, people are still having issues with progression. I genuinely cannot understand how the game is this dysfunctional. I can just feel the frustration of players that recently picked up the game only to find out they cannot progress. It is truly unacceptable, but props to Polyphony for continuing to improve the stability of the game regardless. There isn't much to mention for 1.07, except... How did they manage to screw this one up? Oh my god. I genuinely don't understand how this could even happen. So basically, for licenses, all tests taking place on dirt would have to be done on comfort tires. Not exactly the kind of tires we would like when blasting on a loose surface. While I still had the opportunity, I just had to try it out for myself. And yeah, it was game-breaking to say the least. A8 could only be golded with an absolutely flawless performance, not even exaggerating by the way. IB5, on the other hand, could comfortably be golded. Get it? Because comforts? Never mind. And then we have IA3. This is where the bug really proved to be a big problem. Just getting bronze was a struggle, and getting silver was impossible. Even with my best attempt, I was still over a second off. Good job, Polyphony. Moving on to 109, this will be very brief. As usual, fixes, fixes, and fixes. And unfortunately, one note reads, fixed a rare issue wherein the game progression would be reset if the game was started with an unstable network connection. This almost feels like a pattern, or even a rule. With every patch, there must be a mention of progression issues. Good lord. Then, we skipped straight into 1.11, and not because 1.10 has nothing noteworthy, but rather because 1.10 doesn't exist. Why, you ask? I don't know, but my guess is simply the fact that 1.11 is the biggest/best patch up to date. This is the patch where Polyphony finally implemented tweaks and improvements that players wanted, and I'm talking about quality of life improvements. Up to this point, the game had been a meme because of how grindy it has been, along with all the issues. Also, regarding the prices of the cars in the Legend Cars dealership, Imachi said this in the letter. The pricing of cars is a relevant element that conveys their value and rarity, so I do think it's important for it to be linked with the real-world prices. Like, okay, I get it, but who would honestly pay €200 in real hard cash for a single car in a game? While I love GT, this is where a line had to be drawn. The franchise is amazing, but its creator is, greedy? To say the least. But yeah, this game has microtransactions. Basically, 1 million in-game credits is €10. So, to buy the car that costs 20 million, you need to pay €200 real money. Absolutely nuts, I say. But that's where 1.11 shows what it's made of. We got plenty of quality of life improvements. While the expensive car prices remain untouched, the amount of cars available in the used/legendary car dealerships was doubled. Why this is a big deal is that because the game is online, the dealerships refresh every 24 hours. And with Legendary having only 5 cars available at once, not even refreshing fully each day, you can just imagine how long it would take waiting for the cars you're after. But we're not done yet. Aside from various fixes and improvements, Polyphony also tweaked the race prize payouts. This was the best news, as they nerfed the previously best grinding method, a race at Fisherman's Ranch, which dished out around 100k per race. Although they didn't put 100k back to Fisherman's Ranch, we got other races which pay out nicely. For me, however, the best update lies in circuit experiences. I had already completed all of them prior to the patch, and as a result, after installing the update, I went back to each track one by one and claimed a total of 47.7 million. You can just imagine my satisfaction at that moment. Naturally, all the money was effectively wasted on cars, but that's what crates are for, right? Lastly, this patch serves as the first content update for the game. This one added the 8 different hour-long endurances in missions. This and the quality of life improvements made this patch very symbolic. Before we dive into the last patch, we will take a look at 1.12 for a second. So it had been a problem where the Brand Central car invitations expired prematurely. But this update gave away free invitations for every single car that has it, with a long deadline. As of the time of this video, I only have one of these invite cars left, and the invite expires May 20th. Still plenty of time to get it. And finally, Patch 1.13, the latest to date, as well as the second content update. First off, we got our first DLC cars. While that sounds exciting, much like Sport, the first car update was underwhelming. 3 cars and that's it. The worst part is, one of them is a newer model of an existing car. So what we really got was 2 new cars, the BRZ GT300 and Cappuccino. While K-cars may not be everyone's cup of coffee, no pun intended, it is a welcome addition. Previously, we only had the Beat, Copen S800 and Sports 800. This patch also tweaked the behavior of rear-wheel drives, as I mentioned earlier in the video. But that's all the good news for this patch, along with more fixes and improvements of course. Regrettably, this update was marred by Polyphony's dishonesty. Yamauchi mentioned that future updates in April would include new cars and course layouts. So what's wrong with this statement then? The issue lies in the plural form of course layouts. In this update, all we got layouts-wise was a 24-hour version of Spa. Yes, singular. Not only does this contradict the promised layouts, it's not even a course layout per se, but just an extended pit lane, being the 24-hour version. And finally, wrapping up this video. Based on everything we've discussed, I think we can all agree that the game was released way too early. I can only assume this is due to peer pressure and fan demand, as Sport was not satisfactory enough. True, fans have been anxious, myself included. I was hyped to finally play the next GT installment, my last one being GT4 if my brief visit in Sport doesn't count. But this seems to be the trend with games nowadays. Release the game as early as possible, fix and improve the game later. Whatever happened to those days where games actually needed to be perfected before release? Oh, right. It's been even longer than I thought. Anyway, I can't think of much else to say here, except that I hope Polyphony keeps on improving the game and caring about their players. All of the issues and negative tweaks were bad enough already, but the game is still far from what we all expect. We need more cars, more tracks, and above all, more things to do. At the time of this video, I have obviously completed all licenses and certain experiences, and all except some of the newly added missions. Then all I have left is winning races I still haven't and collect cars, but this is something that I'm naturally constantly working on. I'd also like to thank you for watching the whole video and hope you enjoyed it. It's not often at all, in fact, never, when I make quality videos like these, but I wanted to do it because I owe it to my community that is slowly, but steadily, growing. I also hope you will enjoy GT7 as much as I do, and if you don't own the game yet, have a think and consider. Let's see those comments and thoughts. And that concludes this video. I'm TumaK5, and I hope you're having an awesome day. Thank you so much for watching the video. I hope it was worth it, because the very fact that the video exists now has direct consequences on my side. It's 3:40 PM right now, and I was still working on this video at 3 AM, and I started at 12 PM. I mean, 12 PM. I always confuse AM and PM. I worked around the clock and I really thought I could finish it, but even at 3 AM it was still unfinished. So I took a bit of a risk because I had to go to school today, at Monday, but I obviously didn't go. I was way too tired, so I risked the whole thing. But I hope the video was worth it, worth all this trouble. And I'm just glad it's finally done. I never would have imagined that it would take this long to complete, but it's done. And I hope you won't be expecting any more quality videos from me anytime soon, because this was more than I could handle, really. But yeah, it's done and dealt with, so I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you later.